Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we're going to be going over the most important cards to be picking up from the Phantasmal Flames expansion. The pre-releases are already well underway, and the set is releasing on the 14th of November, so a good time to start looking at what you need in this new expansion to be as competitive as possible for a whole range of decks. Starting off then with the core essentials, these are all going to be cards that are expected to be involved in tier 1 or 2 contenders or have obvious future potential. Starting off with the sort of best trainer cards that we're getting in the expansion then. Dawn is a fantastic supporter card, allowing you to search for a basic Pokemon, a stage 1 and a stage 2 evolution and put them all into your hand at once. That means she's an okay turn 1 option if you really have to, you have nothing else going for you, but ultimately, of course, as the game develops, that gets stronger and stronger. There's a bunch of archetypes that could take advantage of this. I know that Dragapult Dustoir could look to have this instead of some of their Hilders or some Brock Scoutings, where Dawn is sort of filling both roles okay. She's like slightly worse than a Brock on turn 1, but far better on turn 2 or onwards in the game. And you know there's always lots of opportunities to get some basic EX Pokemon like Pheasantipity, Blood Moon Ursaluna, and Latias, as well as things like Dracloak for draw, or Dusknoir Dusclops for our Cursed Blast synergy. So great in Dragadusk already. Also looking very promising in Charizard. Charizard Pidgeot builds, you know, the traditional builds that we have seen, where you just have so many evolutions that you want to build up. That can sometimes also mean the Dustoir package in the back. But also there has been an offshoot of Charizard builds in Japan that have gone for the Noctowl and Terra approach, where you have some basic Terras that you can search from Dawn, then you can get Noctowl and a Pidgeot, or the Charizard, then the basic Terra gets you online with Jewel Seeker, and suddenly you're popping off with all sorts of combos from there. So this could really change deck building altogether, could end up being that same sort of tech includes as like a 2 or 3 of maybe in decks over the likes of Brock or Jacques or Hilda that we've seen in a number of decks, but simply because we have such a versatile spread of really solid ability and attacking basics, as well as like good stage 1 and stage 2s for both abilities and attacks. I could see this going into Charizard decks, Draga decks, more like roguey archetypes that just need to have a Pidgeot to help stabilize. Things like Conkeldurr could be useful. You know, there's just so many ways where this card is going to be really strong. Very good for the Alakazam deck as well. Like, there's so many reasons why Dawn is a really important 4-ofs right now, but also going into the future can be fantastic. I think it's worth picking up 4 copies of the Jumbo Ice Cream as well. Healing 80 from your active that has 3 or more energy attached. We've seen a number of Mega Evolutions like Kangaskhan and Absol be the face of like tanking style archetypes, especially Kangaskhan with Bouffalon in there as well. So having that 80 heal, especially when you're forcing the opponent through that reduction more and more often throughout the game, that's definitely strong. And the Jumbo Ice Cream can be stackable as well, of course, so you can play multiple of them on a turn. I feel like this is going to be a really valuable card for Crustal decks, as well as Kangaskhan decks. It might even lead us more further down a Quad Kanga route than what we have seen previously. Then I'm saying 2 copies of the Heat Burner. I think this item is really versatile, but just the nature of the card, I don't think you need that many copies of it. You can discard a fire from hand to get rid of a stadium card, a special energy, or a tool from your opponent's side of the field, and that is just more versatile than sometimes having like 1 stadium bump in Ceruledge. Of course, this is also like a plus 20 damage by giving you an extra means of discarding fire from hand. This could be useful in Golden Go, again, can count as a bounce to things like Tool Jammer, or Jamming Tower I should say, but then can also be sometimes a way of getting rid of special energy and whatnot, which could be good. Some Charizard decks are looking to play this as well, so just the versatility of what you can discard from a board makes this worthwhile over sometimes like a tech Stadium Include or something like that within the list, so definitely solid there. Then there's 4 copies of the Wonder Patch. I think this card may not be good straight out the gate, although I do want to try a Area Zero Lily's Clefairy style deck with this, knowing that Clefairy is a really efficient attacking option and the Wonder Patch gives you good energy acceleration. I feel like playing this alongside something like even Iron Valiant could be fun, something that I've been experimenting with, or at least have had discussions about as a really cool combo. So I do think there's obviously going to be a gap to fill, a void, when God of War EX goes, and I think Wonder Patch would be the new face of Psychic for the future. So I do think that this is definitely the sort of more bags of potential card than something that instantly becomes a tier 1 or 2 deck. Unlike the Battle Colosseum that instantly comes in to check some of the strongest abilities and attacks that we have in the game, where it prevents all damage counters from being placed on your benched Pokemon or on both players' benched Pokemon. by abilities or attacks. So that's immediately trying to hit things like Monkey Dory, Phantom Dive, so many more things. Like, I'm barely scratching the surface here. Yes, it's a passive stadium that your opponent can counter, but effectively you're trying to tax the stage 2 decks in the game that really rely on Monkey Dory and whatnot to having to play a huge chunk of stadium cards. If not, you can just hit the Colosseum plus Iono, and maybe they just don't have access to more, and suddenly you're really neutering what would otherwise be a really powerful turn from them into quite a mediocre one. So trying to check some of the best decks in the game immediately means this is a potential 4 of in decks. Like, we have seen decks that don't necessarily need a stadium go for this sort of effect. I feel like things like the Quad Jamming Tower in Arch Aladon, like a low maintenance, easy to play deck that can just play this card, and suddenly you make opponents' decks just far worse. Suddenly you like carve out a niche for yourself of being one of the better disruptors in the game. And I feel like that could also be a way for Colosseum to go. Let's start looking at some Pokemon then. I think Mega Lopunny EX is just generically so well statted that it could find its way as a tech line into a number of decks. Not just thanks to its 1 energy attack, the Gale Thrust that does 60 plus 170 more if it became your active from the bench this turn. So instantly a really nice Boss's Orders knockout on basic EX Pokemon, I think, is the main priority for the Lopunny. But the reason why it may be a tech inclusion into certain archetypes is because of its second attack that can deal 160 for 2 and get through all effects of your opponent's active. So it's instantly a cornerstone and crustal answer in just one body that can also be a really good, like, at any point in the game I can gust and take a 2 prize KO on a pretty decently sized Pokemon as well, 330 hit points. I do think this could make it into Charizard decks, Gongo decks. That's mostly what we've seen out in Japan so far, but I also think this could be the face of its own archetype, possibly with a poison package giving you Binding Mochi, so you can hit 280 for 1 attachment, which sounds really dangerous, but also gives you, like, a good way to pivot between your Pokemon, and a means of taking prizes early on without committing a 3 prize Pokemon to the board. That is still the big downside of this Mega, but it does seem to be ruthlessly efficient, and it's seeing a lot of play out in Japan in various means. So definitely worth picking up no matter what you're really playing at the moment, or if you plan to use it as its own archetype, maybe you can get away with just playing or just picking up 1 or 2 copies and say that that's okay. Let's start looking at some of the dark stuff then. The Mega Gengar EX, of course, has its own League Battle deck, so you could think about getting the Battle deck anyway, but if you just want to pick up the singles, I think a decent-sized line of Gengar and some Grimsley's move also makes sense here. I do think the Grimsley combines really well with Gengar, probably the best target we have in the game right now, so if you can combine that with some Academy at Nights and whatnot, I'm definitely going to experiment with that in an Ends Zoroark deck, but equally we could just have like a Rare Candy approach and get Gengar into play the old-fashioned way, where you're giving up less prize cards for your dark Pokemon being knocked out by damage from an attack. So this can really make some already pretty good dark Pokemon in the game that we have, like Grimmsnarl, Charizard, and Zoroark, just to name a handful. Even things like Roaring Moon has seen play out in Japan. When they take 1 less prize card for knocking them out, that's obviously clearly very strong. So and it's also got a decent attack as well. A 2 energy attack that moves energy off itself makes it actually pretty efficient. So yeah, I think even just a pure Gengar deck is potentially possible, just with rare candies and whatnot. There's also some different dark stuff coming out in Phantasmal Flames. The Toxtricity new energy accelerator that can attach energy from the deck to your benched Pokemon, and to your benched dark Pokemon, I should say, and it puts 2 counters on them. Naturally, that allows you to play a deck with Monkey Dory because you're already playing Darkness Energy and you're damaging your own stuff. So it's like a Stage 1 mini Gardevoir, but from the deck rather than the discard pile. So there's upsides and downsides here. Obviously, your type coverage is one of the bigger boasts, but you're only being able to attach to the bench. But then again, you have Petrun EX, so maybe you can get away with that. I feel like I haven't seen crazy powerful decks from the Toxtricity, but this sort of acceleration just screams potential, especially when we have the strong Viper coming out that has a means of dealing 240 if you have a Mega EX Pokemon in play. That could either be Sharpedo or Absol right now as potential options. They have to be Dark Megas, and we know that Absol is a very good card, so Absol Toxtricity could be a new means of trying to build around that deck, and then you have Viper as a decent single prize beat stick. I feel like that could be a decent combo. I've also tried to experiment with like a more 2 prizey build that doesn't play Viper, and you just have like Petrarunt, Okidogi, the Monkey Dory EX, stuff like that in the deck as a potential toolbox, also with like Roaring Moon and Absol still in there. So I think Toxtricity does have a lot of potential. It's just about the consistency right now that I think has to be worked on, but definitely a ton of experimentation to be had with this sort of card. Moving on to the fire stuff, of course we are Phantasmal Flames here, and the fire stuff definitely seems to be quite important to pick up right now. I am saying the Mega Zard X EX right now. I think 2 copies is plenty. At the moment, it's a bit part player in the regular Charizard Pidgeot style deck. I think also picking up just a handful of copies of the lower evolutions is important here as well. But I don't have much hope for a pure Megazard deck, and even if that was the case, I think 2 copies is still fine, because you can still have the Terra Zard EX in that build just to be a late game beater anyway, especially if the prize map goes a certain direction for the opponent. That can end up being a really good sweeper for you. So I think 2 Megazard X EX, good if you're already playing Charizard Pidgeot as a one-of to be, again, like a cornerstone answer / generic high damage output sweep. But also just being, another type coverage mod as well to help you cover your grass weakness on the Terra. There's a lot of reasons to like the Megazard X. A couple copies of the Moltres, I think this card is really strong. It can really check the Teal Mask Ogerpon EX. It can also, with a damage mod, get into Golden Go EX for just 1 fire energy, as it does more damage into EXs. So immediately that can help patch up some otherwise awkward matchups and finally have a good check in the game to Golden Go that is showing itself to be more and more of a top tier threat in the game. Oricorio EX, probably the least core essential on this entire page so far, but I do think if you want to try out the Megazard X deck, this would be a good ability. And again, I think this just has bags of potential for the future because it's really, really powerful energy acceleration from a basic EX Pokemon. So it's clearly niche in what it can use right now. Really only Megazard X can take advantage of it. But for future, if we do get more Fire Megas, it is going to end up being a really useful engine to take advantage of. And the last card is just Mega Diancie EX. This is showing up in a ton of Gardevoir builds, so immediately you have to think this is going to be a top tier contender, as it's a Psychic Pokemon not weak to Dark, so immediately you can cover some of your Dark matchups by having this bulky Pokemon. It only has 270, but then also has a minus 30 from its ability, so it's effectively a 300 hit point basic EX, and we've seen already from Kangaskhan and Absol that's more than serviceable, especially in a deck like Gardevoir that's naturally playing Bravery Charms already, and Garland Ray can deal a solid 240 by discarding 2 energy from it. It can give you something to do if you don't want to put your Gardevoir in play or can't get your rare candy. You can just slow attach to this and be still a threatening body. And of course, it's still great to come into play with this card and just give you protection against the crucial dark weakness that Gardevoir is worried about. And also, this is a great option. 240 is great damage output at dealing with racing decks as well. If they can't reach into Diancie, this can take 4 prizes for 3 effectively, as long as the opponent can't one-hit KO it, and suddenly you're looking in really, really good shape. So an easy include for Gardevoir players. Let's have a look at the Believer Buylist then. These are cards that may prove themselves to be mid-tier contenders or have a good amount of potential. Starting off with the other trainers I think could be worth picking up if you are interested, would be a couple copies of the Punk Helmet. It's not a great card, but there are so many good dark decks that I think it could end up having a home just as the next best option if you're playing an Arven Engine, like a why not sort of card, where you're putting counters on the attacking Pokemon. This could be a math fixer for certain decks. Same thing really for the Sacred Charm tool, where I can't really see an archetype right now that wants to use this, but the Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks from opponents' Pokemon that have any abilities. Again, it's kind of more narrow or more targeted to matchups based on what cards and decks in the game that are utilizing abilities. Now, there are obviously a lot of decks that do right now that are in the top of the meta, but there's also already really good hit point buff for basics. There's decent defensive tools already for stage 1s. So it's really only if you're playing a deck that wants to tank with both basic stage 1s and stage 2s that the Sacred Charm is going to be better than just having Bravery Charm or Rigid Bands in your deck anyway. So a bit of a tough call right now. Could end up seeing some play in Control. That's really where I'm expecting this to show up. And then Fire Breather, not an amazing supporter card, but it does get a lot of value. It searches out 7 cards from your deck, which is really excellent deck thinning. It could be good for the Charizard X EX deck. It could also be okay for Saraj and Golden Go if you build in a slightly different way. But just because this isn't really a consistency card, I feel like it has to be timed correctly, and that comes with a whole heap of headaches. So the card is definitely a lot of burst potential and works nicely with the likes of Energy Recycler as well if you need to do it again, if it's a Golden Go or something. But I do think it's probably not the premium way to play any of the decks that I've just mentioned. Next up is the Mega Sharpedo. I alluded to this with the Seviper, and I think it's weird to have the Seviper as a core, but not the Sharpedo. But that's mostly because I think Absol is far better than Sharpedo. Sharpedo is trying to be another Stage 1 Beat Stick style card that goes alongside the Toxtricity. But my concern is that's like so much setup, and even then, Sharpedo only does 270 if it has damage on, and you really don't want to be damaging 3 prizes because they're just easier to knock out then for the opponents. It shares that common grass weakness that we know that like Zoro, Zard, Grimmsnarl all have. So grass is going to still be on high alert in the format. That's not really going to change. So I think Sharpedo is a little bit squishy and vulnerable. So I'm not too pro it. I think if you want to try the Seviper, I would try it out with Absol instead, because I think Sharpedo is just not worth the extra investment to get it going. Next up, there's this Mismagius EX. It can be quite annoying, where if it's active, your opponent switches, the new active is confused. Maybe this is good for like some stalling tactics and whatnot. I don't think it's a strong enough attacker, and it's weird. It's like frustrating that this Mismagius has to stay active for it to be that worthwhile. Maybe like a hit and run style deck at some point could be useful. But I don't know, it definitely has its issues here. So I think maybe picking up 2 just out of intrigue and interest. Again, it's a psychic type, and we know there's a lot of support there to try and make it work. Maybe we can try and buff up the Mismagius and have the new Wonder Patch to get its 2 energy attack cost going. And it does draw cards from its own attack, but the damage output isn't great. You're probably relying on flips from the opponent, and that's never a good thing to fall back on as a main strategy. Linoon is kind of cool, can work with the Mega Lopunny. That's kind of the main thing that stands out right now, is it can help you switch Megas. And it's also fan call searchable from a fan Rotom. So there is some synergy there, but at the moment we have Jet Energy, so I think Lopunny is absolutely fine just sticking with that sort of package, and you don't necessarily need to go into the Linoon right now. But if you're already playing fan Rotom in a Lopunny deck, maybe this is worth picking up just a couple of these to get your switching sorted. Then we have Bronzong, pretty cool tool drop strategy. We know that this is a Metal Stage 1, so Genesect EX can get multiple Metal Stage 1s going, and I think that works nicely with Revavroom EX, that can have up to 4 tools attached to it, and is also a Metal type. So the deck kind of builds itself, where you're trying to have the Revavroom with a bunch of tanking tools on it, ideally, to then make the Bronzong hit well, and also make it so that your opponent can't deal with a Revavroom and just take all your tools off the board. You're trying to make yourself untouchable. That's kind of the core concept here. You are still reliant on special energy cards. You're going to have a weird composition of a deck because you need to fit so much space for tools. So a little bit inconsistent, but you can see how that deck's going to come together. Then we have the Flygon. This is the new milling approach. Again, I don't think it's all that strong, but you have to build a lot of them to make the most out of Flapping Sand, because it's coming into play effect as well as when it's knocked out, where you're discarding cards of the top card of your opponent's deck. This would work really well with a Dawn supporter, of course, because you want to continually chain your Flygon, and maybe even things like Turo to pick up and put down the Flygon is kind of the ideal situation. But I do think this is slower than other mill decks that we have in the game right now. The one copy of Ceruledge, I think this could work in a Ceruledge EX deck. I also think it could be useful in a Golden Go deck if you want to have the Fire Breather little mini package or something like that. Just so you can have like a Mirror Tech card and a prize offsetting card, something like that. It feels like a bit awkward to work in, but just because we know that Ceruledge and Charcadet specifically is such a good evolving Pokemon, where we have both Armarouge and Ceruledge EX already being playable in the game, I thought it was worth talking about having one of these just as, again, a potential like wall breaking card at the very least, slash like single prize uptrade mon into some bench sitting EXs. It could be pretty okay. And then finally the Rotom EX, just for another one of these interesting tool approach decks where you can now attach multiple to your other Pokemon named Rotom, and we have a bunch of Rotom that can have different type coverage, including Mo Rotom, and I've mentioned a few times how grass is a really important weakness right now, so Mo Rotom could be literally mowing through some popular decks in the format, and then you have the other flavors of Rotom to get through other random threats, like Heat Rotom could be okay as well for like Golden Go. So randomly you do cover a lot of the format just through weakness, and the multi-adapter allows you to actually ramp that damage output from Gadget Show. So pretty fun one overall. But that's it. That's everything from Phantasmal Flames. Let me know what Believer cards you're going to be picking up yourself. I really want to try out the Bronzong deck. I think it's a bit nice throwback, and I think works really nicely with Genesect, which is just a broken card. That's the thing that I'm kind of interested in, just for a bit of fun. But overall, not too expensive of a set. I think the Lopunny is absolutely cracked. I think Dawn is a no-brainer, and Battle Coliseum is going to be changing the game quite substantially as well. But I'll hear all your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching. More Phantasmal Flame stuff coming very soon, so we'll see you there. Cheers.